Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi everyone, welcome to lecture number 26, the first lecture on compensating wage differential. If you remember, in our last lecture we discussed about the wage schooling locus that gives the salary that workers earns if he or she completes a particular level of schooling, and workers choose the point on the wage schooling locus that maximizes the present value of their lifetime earnings. Therefore, the workers quit school when the marginal rate of return to schooling equals to the rate of discount. That was the stopping rule, that how much of year of schooling one should acquire. It is nothing but just the marginal rate of return equals to the discount rate. Further, we have discussed that when workers differ only in their discount rates, the rate of return to schooling can be estimated by comparing the earnings of different workers. However, when the workers differ in their innate ability, the wage differential among workers does not measure the rate of return to schooling, because the wage gap also depends on unobserved ability differential. So, moreover, schooling can play a signaling role in the labor market, which indicates that employers that the workers carrying the certificate or the diploma is highly productive workers. So, employers find that the workers, those who are having some kind of schooling with some degree or certificate, they are highly productive. So, it acts as a signal. So, this signaling value of education can help the firm to differentiate highly productive workers from the less productive workers. This was the content in our last lecture. So, in this lecture we are going to discuss about compensating wage differential. Why wage differential arises in the labor market? Why different workers they get different wages? The compensating wage differential refers to the variation in the wages that compensate workers for difference in the working conditions, some job features, job characteristics, or some non-monetary aspects of employment. So, when there is some kind of differences are there in terms of working conditions, job characteristics, or non-monetary aspects, this compensating wage differential arises in the labor market. Let us try to understand how it works. Let us say one job involves working in hazardous condition, while another is in the safe office environment. So, to attract workers to this hazardous job, the employer may offer higher wages to compensate for this risk. So, this wage differential is the extra compensation paid to the workers in taking on the riskier job. Similarly, jobs with undesirable characteristics like long working hours, heavy physical labor, or unpleasant working conditions may offer higher wages to attract workers. On the other hand, jobs with desirable features like flexible hour, pleasant working environment, or opportunities for the advancement may pay lower wages to the workers because they already provide these non-monetary benefits. So, compensating wage differential help and ensures that the workers are willing to take the jobs with varying level of risk or discomfort by adjusting their compensation accordingly. So, the idea that this job characteristics influence the nature of labor market equilibrium was first proposed by Adam Smith in 1776. Adam Smith is the father of economics. In the first statement of what labor market equilibrium is about, Smith argued that compensating wage differentials arise to compensate workers for the non-wage characteristics of the job. So, in his book Wealth of Nation, I am going to quote the statement which he has made in 1776 on compensating wage differentials. To quote his work, it is said that the whole of the advantages and disadvantages of different employment of labor and stock must in the same neighborhood be either perfectly equal or continually trending to equality. If in the same neighborhood there was any employment either evidently or less advantageous than the rest, so many people would crowd into it, and in the one case, and so many would desert it in the others. So, that is advantages would soon return to the level of the other employments. This is this at least would be the case in the society where earnings were left to follow their rational course, where there was perfect liberty, and where every man was perfectly free both to choose what occupation he thought proper, change it as often as he thought proper. So, this is what Adam Smith talked about when it is a compensating wage differential. According to him, it is not the wage that is equated across jobs in competitive market, but the whole of the advantages and disadvantages of the job. So, firms that have unpleasant working condition must offer some offsetting advantage such as higher wages in order to attract the workers, and firms that offer pleasant working conditions can get away with paying lower wage rates, in effect making the workers pay for the enjoyable environment. So, wage differentials arises because of the whole of the advantage and disadvantage of the job. So, compensating wage differential occurs due to various factors like risk and safety. Jobs with higher level of risk or safety hazards often offer higher wages to compensate the workers for the potential danger they face. Industries like construction, mining, firefighting typically offer high wages due to the inherent risk involved in these jobs. Further, because of the difference in the job characteristics, compensating wage differential exist. Some jobs require undesirable tasks such as heavy physical labor, exposure to extreme weather conditions or unpleasant working environment. So, to attract workers to these roles, employer may offer higher wages to compensate for the discomfort. Further, this compensating wage differential arises because of the skill requirements. Jobs that require specialized skills, educations or training may offer higher wages to attract qualified workers. So, the scarcity of these skills may lead to certain wage differentials. So, the scarcity of skilled workers in certain industries or professions can drive up the wages. Further, this compensating wage differential may arise because of the location. There is some locational advantage and disadvantages. Wage level can vary depending on the cost of the living and local market conditions. Workers may demand higher wages to compensate for living expenses in the expensive cities or in the regions. Further, because of some non-monetary benefits, this compensating wage differential arises, and there could be some compensation at a higher level. Some jobs offer non-monetary benefits such as flexible hour, opportunities for career advancement of the workers, or a supportive work culture. So, workers may accept lower wages in exchange of these perks, resulting in compensating wage differential. When there is some difficult situations are there and there is no flexible hour and very limited opportunities for the career advancement, in those cases the wages could be high for the workers. Further, the demand and supply certainly plays a significant role in compensating wage differentials. So, the demand for certain types of labor relative to its supply can influence the wage differentials. So, jobs with high demand and low supply workers may offer higher wages to attract talents, particularly in those professions. So, the nature of labor market equilibrium in the presence of compensating wage differentials differs radically from equilibrium which typically by the traditional supply demand framework. In our traditional model of demand and supply, which guides the allocation of workers across the farms so as to achieve an efficient allocation of resources. So, it is how many number of workers will be employed, where they should be employed, it is completely guided by the wage rate. Workers and the farms move to whichever market offers them the best opportunities, equating the wages and the value of marginal product across the markets in the process. So, that is what how it happens in a traditional model, labor market equilibrium model. So, in a real sense, the workers and the farms are anonymous, and it does not matter who works where, if we go with this traditional model of demand and supply and allocating the workers. But the introduction of this compensating wage differential breaks this anonymity. Workers differ in their preferences for the job characteristics, farms differ in their working conditions that they offer. So, all the workers, they are not same, all the working conditions and the farms, they are not same, providing the same working conditions. So, the theory of compensating wage differential essentially tells us a story of how workers and the farms, the match made in the labor market. So, workers who are looking for a particular set of job amenities search out those farms that provide it. So, as a result, the allocation of labor to the farm is not random, and it matters who works where. So, the theory of compensating wage differential also provides a starting point for analyzing one of the central question in the economics, that why do different workers get paid differently. So, in this lecture we focus on the role played by the characteristics of jobs in generating such wage differentials in the labor market. We are not talking about from the workers perspective, we are only talking about the work environment perspective, the characteristics of the jobs from the farm's perspective. Overall, this compensating wage differential reflect the interplay of various factors in the labor market, including worker preferences, employer strategy, and economic conditions. Let us begin by analyzing how compensating wage differential arises in the context of a very simple and policy relevant example. Suppose there are only two types of jobs in the labor market. Some jobs offer a completely safe environment, and the probability of injury in these jobs is equals to 0. However, other jobs offer an inherently risky environment, and probability of injury in those jobs are equal to 1. So, let us assume this simple example that only two types of jobs are available, one is in the risk environment, another one is in the safe environment. And the probability of injury is 0 in the safe environment, and the probability of injury is 1 in the risk environment. We are assuming that the workers have complete information about the risk level associated with every job, which means the workers knows whether she is employed in a safe job or he or she is employed in a risk job. This is an important assumption because some risks may not be detectable for many years, even though it was there, but workers they do not have the information about it. So, in that case the model will not work. Like prior to 1960s, the asbestos companies, the asbestos products were regularly used to insulate buildings. So, asbestos products are generally used to insulate buildings. Few persons they knew that a continuous exposure to asbestos, such as exposure faced by many construction workers, had adverse effects on their health. So, in fact, it took a long time for the scientific evidence on the relationship between asbestos fibers and a host of health problems to become widely known. So, most of the people they do not know that working in asbestos product company may lead to some kind of health hazards. So, we will discuss how our analysis is affected when the workers does not know that he or she is being exposed to particular risk. So, when we talk about this compensating wage differential, we are assuming that the workers care about whether they work in a risk environment or they work in a safe environment, and they have the complete information about the magnitude of the risk which is involved in the work environment, and they also care about the wages they earn on the job. So, if you want to write the utility function of a worker, then we can write it like utility is a function of the wages which they are going to get by working in that environment, risk or safe environment, and the risk of injury or the degree of injury which is involved in the job. So, if we can write and derive the utility function of the particular individual, this can be written that utility is a function of the wage and also the risk of injury which is involved in the job. So, from this equation we can say that the marginal utility of income gives the change in the utility resulting from 1 unit increase in the worker's income, holding constant the risk on the job. So, keeping the risk constant, how the marginal utility of income gives the change in the utility resulting from 1 unit increase in the worker's income. We assume that workers prefer higher wages, so that the marginal utility of income is positive, and the marginal utility of risk gives the change in the utility resulting from 1 unit change in the probability of injury, holding the constant the worker's income. So, if we want to see that how it works, we assume that initially we assume that the risk is a bad product. So, the marginal utility of risk is negative. However, you may find that some workers may enjoy being exposed to the risk of injury, and their marginal utility of risk is positive for these workers. So, these workers, they are the risk lover. Right now, we are ignoring the existence of these risk lovers. We will discuss about in how the utility function is going to behave in case of the worker would like to work in the risk environment in our later discussions. However, for the time being, we are considering that risk is a bad product, and the marginal utility of risk is negative. So, when we are plotting this utility function indifference curve for this particular individual, we can see that utility is a function of the wage and the risk of injury involved in the job, and we are saying that working in a safe environment, the probability of injury is 0, and working in a risk environment, the probability of injury is 1. So, on the x axis we have taken the probability of injury, on the y axis we have taken the wage rate, and if the worker is going to work in the safe environment, the probability of injury is 0, and if the worker is going to work in the risk environment, the probability of injury is 1. Now, if the wage rate is W0 at this given wage rate, the worker is operating on this utility function U0, and worker would prefer to work at a safe environment and operating at point P. Now, if you look at it at this W0, the worker is not going to prefer to work on a risk environment where the probability of injury is high. So, the worker is not going to work in a risk environment when the wage rate is W0. The worker is only going to work in a safe environment when the wage rate is W0 and operating at the utility function U0. This indifference curves, they describe that the worker's choice between income and risk of injury must be upward sloping, because risk is a bad. Suppose that the worker is currently at point P in the indifference curve. So, the only way to persuade the worker to move to the riskier job and hold her utility constant is by increasing only her income, wage. So, then only the worker would obviously be worse off if she moved to a riskier job and her wages are going down. So, the curvature of this indifference curve reflects the usual assumption that indifference curves are convex. So, you can see when we talk about the wage rate W0, the worker is working at point P and operating with this utility function U0 and preferring to work in a safe environment. Now, with the same wage rate, he would not prefer to work in a risk environment because his utility is going down. Now, if we say that to attract this worker to work in a risk environment, and if we are going to offer him this W-1 wage rate, then this W-1 wage rate is going to, in that case, he may prefer to work in a risk environment as compared to a safe environment. He may go to work in a, but to attract him, it is not the sufficient, this much of wage increase is not sufficient. Still he will prefer to work in a safe environment. if you are going to attract the worker to work in a risk environment, if you are going to give him W double dash 1 wage rate, then in that case maybe the worker shift to the new utility function W double dash 1, where the utility is much higher, then he may think that he can work in a say risk environment. Now, if we want to attract this particular worker who is working at W0 wage rate, operating at U0 utility function, to work in a risk environment, then we have to offer him a wage rate which is W hat 1. Then only, keeping his utility constant, his wages has gone up significantly, which may attract him and make him indifferent whether to work in a risk environment or to work in a safe environment. So, the wages has to increase up to W hat 1, so that the worker becomes indifferent while choosing between these two job offers. The difference between W0 and W hat 1 is the reservation wage, is the reservation wage to attract the worker to work in a risk environment. So, if you want to attract the worker, then to work in the risk environment, then you have to pay the wage premium, which is a wage differential, which is W delta W hat, which is nothing but the difference between W0 and W hat 1. So, for this particular worker, this is the reservation wage, this much of amount of wage rate, increase in the wage rate will attract him to get into the risk environment. However, if you see, these individuals are different in their approach, and the individual workers may have different reservation wages and preferences to work in risk environment and safe environment. So, this difference delta W hat may be different for different workers. So, when we look at this graph, the indifference curve U0 provides a great deal of information about how much this particular worker dislikes being injured. So, for example, he would obviously prefer to working in the safe environment to working in the risk environment if the risk job only pays W dash 1 wage rate. So, in that case, he would prefer to work in a safe environment. Her utility in the safe job will be U0, would then exceed her utility in the risk job. Similarly, the worker would prefer working in the risk job if that job paid W dash 1, utility would increase U double dash 1. So, he will have a higher level of utility going to U double dash 1. So, the worker, however, would be indifferent between safe job and risk job if the risk job pays a wage rate which is equals to W hat 1. So, we define the worker's reservation price as the amount of money it would take to bribe into accepting the risk job, or the difference which is delta W hat is nothing but W hat 1 minus W0. So, if the worker's income were to increase by a delta W hat as he switched from the safe job to risk job, he would be indifferent about being exposed to the additional risk. So, in that case he is indifferent and he may go for a risk job because the wage rate has gone up. So, the reservation price therefore is the worker's answer to the age old question that how much would it take for you to do something that you would rather not do. So, the different workers probably have different attitude towards the risk. So, depending on how we draw the indifference curves, the magnitude of this reservation wage would be small amount or large amount. So, for instance, if the workers indifference curve between income and risk were relatively flat, then the reservation price would be relatively small, and if the indifference curves are relatively stiff, then the reservation price would be very high. So, the greater the worker's dislike for the risk, the greater the bribe he demands for switching from the safe job to risk job, and greater the reservation price. So, in our next lecture, we will discuss about, we will derive the supply curve to the risk jobs, and also we will talk about the demand for the risk jobs, and we will discuss about this determining the market compensating differentials. Thank you.